I'm the father of 2 wonderful boys in our public schools, and my wife Karen is a public school teacher here in Fairfax. I've served combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, where I was awarded the Bronze Star. I've stayed in the U.S. Army Reserves, where I'm a lieutenant colonel, and served in some of the most elite units in the military. In the private sector, I had the opportunity to work on some of the most difficult problems confronting U.S. manufacturers, and then had an amazing chance to be the project leader of a team working with the Department of Veterans Affairs that found $1 billion of savings that we could redirect towards our veterans. And after we've lost 5 times in a row to Barbara Comstock, running DC insiders, people who just moved to the districts, and local elected officials, I'd offer them the best chance we have to finally beat her in November. Because I can offer the starkest contrast between her record of service to special interests and my record of service to our country. But you don't just have to take me on my word. Look no further than Pennsylvania, where fellow vote vets endorsed candidate Connor Lamb, running on a record of service, won in a district that Trump carried by 20 points. We can do that here. But it's not just about winning. It's about having the courage to fight for our progressive values after you win. And I will. Because I've seen firsthand the consequences of Washington cowardice. It's inscribed on the headstones of my friends. And as someone who's entitled to health care because of his veteran status, I'm ready to go to Washington and fight so that every American can get access to quality, affordable health care. So I support a Medicare for All option. So if you can't get or don't like the insurance you get through the exchanges or your employer, you can opt into Medicare. I know we can do it. As someone who's carried an assault rifle in the deserts of Iraq, in the hills of Afghanistan, I know that the weapons of war I carry have no place in our schools or on our streets. And so I'm ready to take on and fight the NRA, and they're scared and they know it, because they're putting me on NRA TV and attacking me. And finally, I'm ready to hold accountable this 5-time draft-dodging coward at war with our values, challenging our status as a beacon on the hill that welcomed my family and so many others. To be part of the new generation of proven leaders who are bold, who will go to Washington, put country before party, service before self, and people before politics, who will fight for us. Because that's what I've been doing all my life. And I hope to earn your vote on June 12th. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Jennifer Wexton, and I have spent my entire career standing up to bullies and helping give a voice to those who wouldn't otherwise have one. And I can think of no time more than now that we need both those things in our Congress. Now, it still kind of blows me away that I'm here running for Congress. I never aspired to run for office, which is funny because I'm the only one on this panel who actually serves an elected office now. But for me, I went to law school because I wanted to help people. And I was able to do that as a prosecutor in Loudoun County for a number of years. I was able to do that as an attorney and advocate for kids who had been abused and neglected. I was able to do it as an attorney in special justice in mental health commitment hearings. And I was even able to do it as a substitute judge in our courts for a while. But when Mark Herring was elected Attorney General, and the Republicans in Loudoun County were set to nominate a candidate whose claim to fame was telling an anti-Semitic joke at a Ken Cuccinelli rally, I knew that it was time for me to step up. And I ran for state senate and I won. And I went down to Richmond, and despite being in the minority, I was able to work across the aisle to find good solutions for people in my district. Despite being in the minority, I've passed over 40 pieces of legislation that do very good and important things. I've had legislation that keeps kids safer in daycares and online. Legislation that helps combat the heroin and opioid crisis in our country. Legislation that's going to help stem the school-to-prison pipeline. And legislation that's going to get much-needed resources into the hands of victims of domestic violence. But I've also fought for our progressive values in Richmond. I have fought for things like equal pay for equal work, paid medical leave, paid family leave, closing the gun show loophole and expanding universal background checks throughout Virginia. Expanding Medicaid to the more than 300,000 Virginians who fall in the coverage gap. And these are the things that I will continue to do in Congress. Now, we have Donald Trump in the White House. We have a Congress who refused to stand up to him and remember the people who sent them there. I will fight to win this election, and I will always win. I will always remember the people who sent me there and do my best to represent all the people of this district. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Julia Biggins, and I'm also running for Congress, not only to unseat Barbara Comstock, but to fight for science. I'm an infectious disease scientist, and for as long as I can remember, I've been interested in and good at solving complex problems and helping other people. And so I think that naturally led me to a career in infectious disease. I have a PhD in molecular virology from Baylor College of Medicine, and there I wrote my dissertation on HIV transmission, and deciding that that wasn't quite a complex enough virus, I moved on to work for the U.S. Army at USAMRIID in Fort Detrick in Maryland, where I led a team to develop vaccines and therapies for the Ebola virus. And some of our work was used to directly treat infected individuals during the 2014 West Africa outbreak. And so for the last 20 years, I've spent my career researching and developing vaccines and cures for some of the world's most dangerous and deadly pathogens. And as a scientist, I have been open with my data, I have been transparent, I have worked with others to find solutions. My work has been peer-reviewed by my colleagues, and I have peer-reviewed the work of others. And so in short, as a scientist, I have acted as I expect our elected officials to act. But unfortunately today, we're not governed by scientists. We're governed by a professional political class that is dismissive of the data, scared of transparency, and more interested in saying the right thing rather than doing the right thing. And I can honestly say, this time last year, I had no thoughts of running for office. I have 4 children, I was in my career, but the direction the country was headed, Scott Pruitt, head of the EPA, silencing of science, I knew that I had to step out of the lab and stand up for science and for our country. And so as I said, we're not governed by scientists, but maybe it's time that we should be, in my opinion. But not just scientists. I think we need that greater diverse voice. We need more doctors, we need teachers, engineers, farmers, laborers. We need more women, more people of color, members of the LGBTQ community. We need people that look like us, have the professional experience like us, love like us. You know, we did this last year here in Virginia, and I think that we owe it to this country to do it again in 2018 at the congressional level. And so Barbara Comstock is a member of that professional political class, and one that sits on the House Science and Technology Committee. And so don't you think that that position would be better served by an actual scientist rather than another Washington insider? And if we're going to beat Barbara Comstock in the fall, we need a candidate that can draw a sharp contrast, not just in rhetoric, but in ideas and in background. I put forth that we need a scientist. And I'm looking forward so much to answering the questions here today and to your questions afterwards. I really enjoy these forums because it's, you know, we're less than 6 weeks away, and I think it's time for you to know where your candidates stand specifically on the topics and what they're going to do in Congress, you know, beyond the rhetoric, beyond the applause lines, beyond the videos. I look forward to providing you with specifics today. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lindsay Davis Stover, and as a small business owner in this community, I am thrilled to be here. Thank you for having us, and thank you for the endless supply of coffee we have over here this morning. I don't have to tell you how important this race is. It's important because it's our home, but there is absolutely no way to take back the House without coming through the streets of Virginia 10. And we have a congresswoman who has a 97% voting record with Donald Trump, who's bought and paid for by the NRA to the tune of $137,000, who continuously puts special interests and large corporations above our communities and our families. You know, it's one thing to talk about the impacts of legislation like the tax bill. It's another thing entirely to have lived it. I've lived it. In fact, I got my first job at 14, not because my mother was trying to teach me a good business lesson, because I had no other choice. I had to help pay for our phone bill and save for the chance for me to go to college. My mom, in fact, is in her 70s, and she's still a public school teacher, and thank God she's a good one, because her retirement plan has always been to work harder and to work longer. In fact, I still have over $80,000 worth of student debt. Had I had a president like Donald Trump, and quite honestly, a congresswoman like Barbara Comstock, a family like mine wouldn't have had the opportunities that we had. I wouldn't have had the opportunity to serve in AmeriCorps. I wouldn't have had the opportunity to be a chief of staff on Capitol Hill and work on important pieces of legislation for working families, for students, and for veterans. And I wouldn't have had the opportunity to serve as senior advisor in the Obama administration, working on veterans policy. And I wouldn't have the opportunity now to be a small business owner, raising my 2 daughters, and hopefully giving them a few more opportunities than I had growing up. There are a lot of important issues that we're going to discuss today, but real briefly, I'd like to touch on gun violence. I'm a proud candidate of distinction for Moms Demand Action and endorsed by the Pride Fund to end gun violence, because the idea that this issue is too complicated for Washington is absolutely outrageous. I believe that education is the greatest way to provide economic opportunity, and I believe that healthcare is not just a privilege for those who can afford it, but should be a right for everyone, and a right we shouldn't have to keep fighting for over and over and over again. I'm excited to be here today. I also am the only candidate that has extensive federal legislative experience, over 12 years, and at a time when we have a president that is as reckless and irresponsible as the one we have, we need a strong Congress to be a strong check on this administration, and I am ready to hit the ground running on day one. So thank you for having us today.
Hi, my name's Allison Friedman, and I'm so pleased to be with you today because I think this room, more than most, understands 2 fundamental truths, right? First, that Democrats are better at business, and second, that Democratic candidates are often worse at talking about it. And I think I can bring a really important perspective not only to this campaign, but to Congress afterwards. I started my career working in a civil rights nonprofit. I worked on issues that are not only important to our values, but I think important to our business functioning, like voting rights, an independent judiciary, preserving class size restrictions so that kids actually had an opportunity to learn and engage with teachers. And then I helped found a nonprofit to combat human trafficking, in no small part because I came to understand that there are 20 million people in the world trapped in forced labor, many of them tied to the goods and products that we buy. I wrote a bill on consumer transparency that became an international model and then was recruited into the State Department to help oversee our government's efforts both internationally and domestically to combat human trafficking. I worked on a lot of big problems there that made a big impact on the ground, but one of the issues that I'm most proud of working on was helping to reform our entire federal government procurement system. We kept hearing eerily similar stories about people getting duped into debt bondage and ultimately winding up supporting troop movements in Iraq and Afghanistan. And after the policy was written, 1 month before the re-elect campaign, I got a call. And I got a call saying, look, we can't issue this executive order because we won't be seen as doing anything that regulates business before the re-elect campaign. That could be killer. And so I wound up calling every responsible business that I knew, and to a business, they all said something that I think this room fundamentally understands, which is when workers know what they're getting paid and know what job they're getting into, it's actually better for our bottom line and the right thing to do. And they were willing to go on the record on that, and because of that, President Obama was able to issue an executive order right before a re-elect campaign that is something that still stands today. I'm in this race because I believe that we can both be smart and kind as people and in policy. And I think my experience working with the business community, having an MBA, will enable me to go toe-to-toe with Barbara Comstock in a way that is absolutely critical in this election. Thank you.
All right, that was great, guys. Everybody was at 3 minutes. So let's see if we can do that with the questions. So all of you got the predetermined questions before we started, or before you guys got here today. So you all have those questions. So you'll have no problem answering these questions in concise 2 minutes. So the first question is, we have more tech employees in Northern Virginia than in Silicon Valley, Boston, and New York combined. The internet was founded here, but most of those our workers are at government contracting firms. How can we diversify the tech economy and bridge the need/talent gap for high qualified workers in the region?
Thank you. Well, the first thing I believe that we have to do is increase the diversity of our workforce. In the tech industry, in the government contract tech industry, the diversity is primarily white. And I think that the more we can train and promote diversity in the STEM education for our minority population, the more we can grow our tech-able population and grow it that way. We also have to issue tax incentives like we've been doing in order to grow the tech economy. I believe it's been helpful in bringing tech jobs, private tech jobs, to the community. But I think the most important thing that we can do is people don't want to move here because of the transportation issues, and companies don't want to relocate here because of the transportation issues. So I think that the first thing we have to do in Congress, where there is strong bipartisan support, is to provide a transportation and infrastructure bill that allows people to move much more freely and much more safely around Northern Virginia, so that when people come here, they can feel free to be able to travel and commute back and forth to work. And finally, we have to fix the tax code so that when people do move here, they have incentives to move here and they won't be double taxed on their state and local income taxes. So we have to fix the tax code as well, that this Republican administration has screwed up for all of us in the working families in Northern Virginia. Thank you.
I was really excited to see that question on the predetermined list, because in the private sector, I had a chance to work on one of the largest technology transformations in the financial industry in the country. And so the ability to, one of the key things in representatives who are going to represent the tech community and make sure we diversify our ability to serve that community, is having people who actually understand what they're talking about when it comes to what happens in the IT field and the broader technology field. When I think about what we need in terms of technology here and how do we diversify our technology economy, I think there's one thing that stands out, first of all, which is we shouldn't lose what we have as well in terms of continuing to serve the public sector effectively, because it does drive our economy here. And one of the ways we can make sure we can continue to do that is fix some of the ongoing dysfunction in our government by making sure we get to a place where people are working together again in Congress, putting people before politics and country before party, and passing budget and appropriations bills on time, which has barely happened in the last generation. So we need to do that, we need to fix that, and that will help continue to protect and drive our economy. Beyond that, though, to make sure we continue to be an IT hub and we expand beyond the government sector, I think there are a couple of things we need to do. One, we do need to go after our transportation infrastructure here, secure steady funding for Metro, make sure we're building affordable housing along tech corridors and diversifying beyond just roads. The second thing I think we need to do is make sure we're providing education effectively to address the needs of firms who can't find workers qualified doing what they're doing, to do what our tech companies need. And so I would support work in Congress and make sure we fund the ability of people to get technical education that will allow them to fulfill the needs of our small and large businesses locally, because I think that's absolutely critical to making sure we diversify here and expand what we're being able to serve. Thank you.
I think the most important thing that we can do to diversify our economy and attract these businesses is to create the kind of environment that they want to bring their businesses to. And there are several things that we can do to make that happen. First, transportation. I mean, we've all mentioned it. The traffic around here is legendary. We made some great strides in Virginia with the bipartisan transportation bill, and for the first time this session, we now have dedicated metro funding for capital to help get that system back to where it needs to be. But the feds need to pony up their share as well. The metro moves the federal workforce, and the feds need to pick up their share of the tab. Second, education. We need to make sure that we're creating the kind of workforce that is prepared for these jobs that these businesses need. So that includes everything from K through 12, through our community colleges and even our four-year institutions. So we need to fight back against Republican efforts to remove money from our public schools and keep our public schools as strong and vibrant as they can possibly be. We also need to create partnerships with the businesses to make sure that we're providing the training and skills that they need out of their workforce, so that they have that pipeline of people who are ready to come and work, and also to improve the employment prospects for our kids when they get out of school. Finally, we need to make sure that we create an environment here in Virginia that is open and welcoming. And that doesn't mean just fighting back against divisive legislation like the bathroom bill or bills that target immigrants. It also means making sure that we are affirmatively protecting people of all different kinds. And that's why I've carried legislation for the past 4 sessions to add LGBTQ protections to Virginia's fair housing law. You need look no further than what Amazon is looking for where they cite their HQ too. And they want to make sure that their employees are going to be protected and that they're not going to be discriminated against when they go to find housing. So these things are extremely important, and they all work together.
This is a great question, because Silicon Valley is not the only place for innovators. I think here in VA-10 we have a great opportunity to be leaders in this country, and right now we need to make sure we're supporting not just the large innovative companies, but the smaller ones. And I think we can do that by providing smaller companies here in Northern Virginia with more government-backed loans, so that the capital venture people are more willing to invest in our companies here. And I would also, like we've all said, I mean, we can't go anywhere in Northern Virginia without dealing with the traffic. And so not just improving WMATA and the metro, but bringing rail out to where it needs to be, out to our western part of the district, and bringing things like buses and light rails to our communities here in Northern Virginia so that people can get access to the metro into DC. And also, you know, in my field, in science, biotechnology is severely lacking in this area. I still work in Maryland because I couldn't find a suitable job here in Northern Virginia. And with our proximity to the NIH and to our other government agencies, there's no reason that we can't attract that kind of talent to this area. And that goes right hand in hand with my education program, which calls for a robust STEM program, all the way from our universal pre-K all the way through our public universities, private universities, so that people that want to do that kind of work have the training to do so. And also understanding that it's not just colleges, but it's our vocational training, because that can lead us to technical jobs as well, and to make sure that our vocational training is up to speed as well.
Yes, we have to provide an environment that attracts the tech industry and builds upon the industry that we already have. In Virginia, most of the businesses, in fact 90% of the businesses, are classified as small businesses. So we need to ensure that we institute policies that support small businesses, eliminate the barriers of entry to these small businesses, do things like expand broadband access all throughout Virginia 10, and really invest in our workforce, invest in workforce development, provide funding for things like coding to ensure that we can diversify our workforce and that we provide more opportunities for our residents here. Two, I think people are attracted to this area because we have a strong education system, and that education has to start early. We do have to invest in K through 12. Our public education has been under attack with Betsy DeVos and this administration. In fact, this administration has proposed a 10% cut to the Department of Education, just right off the top, no questions asked. They're looking to minimize Stafford loans. They're looking to cut the work-study program by 50%, making it harder for students to be able to go to college. We have to make education a top priority in this country and in this district. And we need to ensure that we best can prepare our workforce by really funding our community college and our apprenticeship programs so that we can have a strong workforce in this area to support the tech industry.
I think the federal government, to some degree, fails to recognize the genius of Virginia's 10th, and I actually think the business community does too. And so let me say what I mean by that. First, there have been 6,000 businesses sold in VA-10 over the course of the last 20 years, and over 80% of them have been bought and sold outside of the district. We have a hub of innovation here that isn't getting recognized and isn't being vertically and horizontally integrated. So, and that gets borne out when DoD and other federal agencies invest in establishing hubs in Boston and in Silicon Valley and other places rather than recognizing the talent that has always been the engine here. I think we can further invest in innovation and building an economy and a federal contracting workforce that supports our federal government, but also looking at the other richness of the economy here that we haven't invested in, whether you're talking about transportation or hospitality or the medical sector, or frankly our failure to invest in building up green energy responses here that we're uniquely positioned to be able to do. And that will require meaningful tax reform that actually gets at what it is we should be investing in, which is the entrepreneurship that Virginia 10 has anchored and excelled at, but is totally left out of this tax bill. And I look forward to talking about that further in future questions.
Thank you all. So the next question is an interesting one. The Virginia 10th CD is definitely reflective of the increasing diversity of our country. And communities of color have been certainly increasingly more so the base of the Democratic Party. Always historically African Americans and increasingly so Latinos and Asians. What is your plan to raise the voter turnout for these specific communities, Latino, Asian, and Black voters? And I will start with Dan this time.
Thank you. It's an incredibly important question, and it's incredibly important that we, as Democrats, speak to our entire country, including communities of color, including minorities, both religious minorities and other minorities. It's also deeply important and personal to me. My family came here because they were a persecuted minority at one point. I'm the son of an immigrant, and it's something I feel so strongly about that after serving in Afghanistan, I sponsored 4 of the interpreters I served with to come on visas as immigrants to this country. So this is part of my life. It's part of what we're going to continue to do as a campaign. I'm a member of the Fairfax NAACP. I think it's important that we go to communities of color where they are. We've been at festivals for the Latino community. We've been at the Adams Center time and again. We've been all over the district meeting folks where they are, asking them about the unique issues that confront their communities and their places of worship and places of gathering. And I think as a party, when we do that, we hear something. We hear that you've taken us for granted. You've taken our votes for granted. And where have you been other than right before an election to listen to what I have to say? To make sure we mobilize, to make sure we increase turnout among minority communities in this country, and right here in Virginia 10. It's going to require people like our campaign. We're constantly going to be out there. We're going to make a commitment not to just be there before an election, but to be there again and again. A commitment to do what Barbara Comstock doesn't do, hold town halls, and to hold them at the places where those communities are and to continue to meet with them. We've done that throughout this campaign. We're going to continue to do it, and I'm going to continue to do it in Congress. Thank you.
Virginia 10 is one of the most diverse districts in the Commonwealth, and the diversity is part of what makes it such a great place to live. A lot of minority communities and people within these communities haven't been turning out to vote because nobody's ever approached them and asked them to. And nobody has come to them and talked with them about what issues are important to them. I believe that you have to meet your voters where they are, and that's what I've done during my entire tenure as a state senator. So I go to the Adams Center regularly. I go to the Gurdwara. I visit with rabbis and churches and all kinds of groups and folks across the district. to find out what their concerns are and find out what their interests are. And guess what? They're just like everyone else. They care about the same issues that we care about: schools, transportation and the economy, jobs, the environment. But we need to make sure that they are heard and that they are valued. Now, I also would be working with various groups that are targeting groups within their own minorities. So, groups like the NAACP, Voto Latino and the Latino Victory Fund, CASA, Emerge America, and all those groups who are working within their own minority groups to turn out voters and to express to them how important it is. Now, a lot of those groups have become more motivated because they're under attack by the Trump administration and the members of Congress who are enabling him. So we have a great opportunity. We need to take advantage of it and help get these people out.
We'll try that again. Just trying to be efficient. So I think it's incumbent upon us as Democrats to be that inclusive party of all, members of minorities, LGBTQ community, because that is what America is today, right? We are a country of immigrants, and so as the Democratic Party, we must include everybody in our party. And I think, as I said in my introduction, it's time for us to see that reflected in our leadership, in our Congress. And so, as the Democratic Party, I think we need to boost up those individuals in the African American community, in the Latino community, in the Muslim community that are interested in running for office and being the leaders of businesses, because that is how we propel those groups forward. And I also agree that it is important to go to where they are. We can't expect them to constantly come to our Democratic meetings. I remember one meeting I was at the Sully District and we talked about how can we be better Democrats. And one idea was to go to the CASA meetings, go to the Adams Center and talk to them in their environment rather than making them come to us. And of course, we can't talk about this inclusivity without making sure that we as Democrats are fighting for immigrants and fighting against what the Trump administration is doing right now. Obviously, what they're doing is discriminatory. It's not based on national security. It's based on Donald Trump being afraid of certain religions and certain countries, which, hate has no place here in this country. And as Democrats, we need to continue to fight for that. And so I think the Muslim ban is un-American. The wall is un-American and unneeded. Right now, the border between us and Mexico is one of the most militarized borders between two countries that is not currently at war. That's not who we are. And so if I am elected to Congress, I will be fighting to make sure that our borders are, while safe, are still welcoming to people from other countries.
Can you hear me? Yeah. So I think our country is at its very best when we are leading on issues like social justice and equality. And our party is at its very best when we are leading on these issues. And yes, we do have to show up. But that's not enough. That is not enough. We have to show up, and we can't just show up around election time. We have to show up every single day. And we have to create the important partnerships needed to work on the issues that are affecting all of our communities in this district. I have been a member of the NAACP in Fairfax for years, and I am working right now with the local chapter in Winchester to partner with education partners to ensure that we can work together to solve some of the issues that they're facing out in that community. In fact, I'm the first Democrat ever to open an office out in Winchester because I believe it is so important to meet voters where they are, and not just around election time, but every single day. We have to work to develop the strong partnerships needed to tackle some of the serious issues that are coming out of this administration. So many of our communities, so many of all of us right now are under attack in this administration, and we have to be working together to ensure we can not only be a strong check on this administration, but we can't just be the party of anti-Trump. We're Democrats. We're better than that. We are the party of ideas and opportunities. And that is more than just showing up. That's creating those partnerships and those opportunities for our district.
When I got to speak at the Women's March, I was standing backstage and with a group of women from Not Without Black Women, and I went up to introduce myself, and they said, "What's your platform for us?" And I talked about that I'm the only candidate who brought up Black Lives Mattering as part of the reasons that I was running in my initial announcement. I have been unequivocal on the fact that a lot of the opportunity and achievement gaps are based in our historical exclusion of access to capital. Can I switch? Yeah. I did not count we talked about how the first access to capital that was open to people in America was the 30-year home mortgage for the middle class, and how too often that was backed by restrictive covenants. And you look at our tax bill now, and there are so many other continued barriers to opportunity around education. We talked about, not only the wall being wrong and stupid and cruel, but, we just looked this week at what Mike Pence had to say about Sheriff Arpaio being an anchor in the rule of law. And I have worked on these issues for 20 years, from voting rights to human trafficking, and I've been there, and it's why I'm really proud that half of my senior staff are women of color. This is something that I take personally, and when I finished, they said, "Thank you." The last person that came up and talked to us said, "Well, I'm a Democrat, what else are you going to do?" And we have to be better than that.
So, in my view, the two biggest impediments to minority voting are as follows. One, it's the biggest stain on the Republican Party, in my view, is this notion that there is this voter fraud out there that allows them to put these ID laws that we all know and have been proven in North Carolina are strictly to reduce minority voting. I will tell you this is the truth. Voter fraud does not exist anywhere in any amount that affects any voting. In 2007, I was in the Department of Justice when I don't know if you remember, when the U.S. Attorney firings happened. And most of those U.S. Attorney firings happened because the Bush administration believed that they weren't prosecuting voter fraud. Well, guess what? We looked for it everywhere. It did not exist. So we have to expose this BS notion that voting fraud is a problem and it exists out there, because that suppresses minority voting more than anything, because it allows these stupid ID laws that do not have anything to do with voter fraud, number one. Number two, a path to citizenship. There has been in the Senate a plan for a long time which is bipartisan that says we can provide a path to citizenship to people. And we need to do that because we have millions of Americans, both TPS, DACA, and others, that don't have a path to citizenship. If they get citizenship, they're going to vote. So we need to get together and pass bipartisan legislation that provides both border security and a path to citizenship that's been pending in the Senate for 5 years now. That's what we need to do.
Thank you. So, the Virginia 10 is obviously a very massive employer of federal employees. So how do you plan to protect federal employees, whistleblowers, attacks on civil protections, and other benefits to them?
You're first.
So the greatest threat to federal employees and whistleblowers right now is Donald J. Trump. And the Congress, who should be a check on him, is enabling him. We all saw what Donald Trump did to Andrew McCabe. and did to him and to his career. And one of the first things that Congress did when they first got started in the 115th session, Barbara Comstock went along with it, was to reinstitute the home enroll rule, through which any member of Congress could unilaterally reduce any single employee's salary down to $1. Things like that are terrible for morale in the federal workplace. And there's a great movement afoot to take away civil service protections under the guise of accountability, right? So they're trying to make it seem like if federal employees are lazy and are not doing their jobs. Nothing could be further from the truth. And what they're doing is decimating the ranks of professional employees in the federal workforce. Now, Virginia 10 is we have a lot of federal workers here. It's a very important part of our economy. And we need to have a professional staff at the agencies throughout the federal government in order to have the continuity to allow government to go on from administration to administration. And the Trump policies and congressional policies are attacking these people and ruining morale and making it very hard for them to do their jobs. Now with whistleblower protections, that's another issue that is a big problem. We've seen the attacks on them at the state level too. Remember, who usually gets the whistle blown on them? Big multinational private companies who are doing business with the federal government. And we've seen this at the state level too, where there are efforts by ALEC and Koch brothers and all those organizations to make it harder for the government to go after industrial polluters, big banks who come into our state and harm our citizens. And so we need to make sure that they're protected. The only way we're going to be able to do that, though, is by taking back the House of Representatives.
So the federal employees are one of our nation's greatest assets. They are the ones that keep our government running. There are so many of them here in Virginia 10. And so I think the number one thing that we in Congress can do is to keep the government running. We saw multiple times during this administration, and I'm surprised I said multiple, but there are multiple times where there has been a fight about having a budget and a government shutdown. And I think that is not the way that we keep this country running. It is unfair to our government workers that we're playing political football with, whether it's the Dreamers or some other topic, versus their jobs. My husband is a federal employee, and he's lucky enough that he will likely, receive back pay or when they go back to work when the government shuts down, but not everybody does. And moreover, when the government shuts down, there are government services that are no longer available to some of our country's most vulnerable populations. And so I think we owe it to our federal employees to have a Congress that can work together with our president and keep the government open and keep it functioning and set things like Dreamers and other things aside to keep the government working. We also obviously need to have a Congress that is strong enough to stand up to a president to keep agencies like the State Department and the EPA fully staffed and fully funded. Right now we're seeing gutting and wide departures of all of our federal agencies because we have a Congress that is not strong enough to stand up to President Trump. And just to move aside from the federal employees, we need to make sure that those employees that are federal contractors that serve just as an important purpose have the living wage that they are so entitled to make sure that Davis-Bacon is in place and that we're supporting the government contractors or government subsidized companies with that kind of wage.
And I'd like to start off by saying thank God for the civil servants right now that are serving in this administration, because having worked at the Department of Veterans Affairs and still having many friends that are civil servants, it is a really tough environment to be in right now. And we are seeing so many people leave government jobs or retire early because they're not protected, they're not supported, and they don't want to put up with this mess, right? And so we have to be able to support the federal workforce. It is one of the most dedicated and committed workforces in the country, and we have to be able to support them and support the union, the AFGE, that ensures that their rights are not compromised. One thing that I think is just so disgusting, quite honestly, the Trump administration is working to privatize many of our agencies. And one example in particular is the Department of Veterans Affairs. I have fought the privatization of the VA since 2002. This is a Koch brothers backed plan. and that this administration is starting to push forward. And privatization in this administration means something entirely different than it did in the Obama administration. For example, in the Department of Veterans Affairs, privatization meant the ability for veterans to receive care closer to home, while also being able to receive care at a VA facility. Privatization, redefined by President Trump, literally means closing the doors of VA hospitals all across this country. One, it's a national security issue. Two, we're not keeping our promises to the men and women who've served our country. And three, it's a horrible economic burden on many of these communities that depend on VA facilities and attracting some of the best physicians in this country. So we have to support a strong federal workforce, we have to protect whistleblowers, and we have to ensure that we keep our nation's promise to those men and women who've served us.
I will be a strong and reliable vote for whistleblower protections and civil service protections. And having served in the federal government and side by side with civil servants, I think the urgent matter at hand goes beyond that. Let me tell you a little bit about the swamp that I know, right? These are people, close to 1/5 of the voters in VA-10 who have foregone a lot of other opportunities to serve. And what they're seeing in this administration right now is a president that has put a person in charge of every single agency that has spent their career attacking every single agency's mission. And more than the civil service protections and the whistleblower protections, which are absolutely critical, this next Congress is going to be responsible for fundamentally rebuilding large swaths of the federal government and reaffirming our commitment to facts and expertise and experience. And I do believe one of my comparative advantages among this panel is I've been there, and I was in the federal government when it worked, not perfectly, but towards a mission of service to the American people and America's reputation and responsibilities internationally. And it's going to take critical investment and oversight to make sure that we can rebuild what we can, whether it's within the Foreign Service Corps or, to Julia's earlier points, our basic belief and adherence to science and facts that then govern health and federal policy.
Allison, I've been there too. I was there for almost 3 decades. And the thing that I know for a fact is that no matter how much, during my almost 3 decades, Democrats, Republicans, the thing that got me through all the time was knowing that no matter whether the Republicans were crapping on federal employees or not, the political above me always had my back. So I knew I could do my job, which was being a public servant, nothing more, nonpartisan, nothing less, was that someone had my back. I have a lot of friends in public service still, federal employees. And I will tell you this, they don't feel like anyone has their back right now. They're doing the blocking and tackling for us, and thank God for all of them, because they are keeping our democracy running right now, and they are preserving our democracy. But I don't know how much longer many of them can continue to act. They, as everybody has said here, their ranks are being reduced. So here's what I would do. As your congressman, I would make sure that every federal employee in conducting my oversight responsibility knew that the Democrats in Congress had their back. And we would be making sure that this executive branch was being called to task every time they were trying to screw around with federal employees. And I think that's the most important thing we can do, because we know what Barbara Comstock stands for. She voted for this Holman Rule, and this Holman Rule just wants to eviscerate the protections of civil servants. And I tell you this, I would be the strongest supporter of federal employees as your congressperson. Thank you.
I think every single person on this stage over here would do a better job than Barbara Comstock protecting our civil servants. Absolutely. So we need to ensure those protections, and we need to fight for them in Congress and repeal the rules and fight for agency leads who are going to actually respect their agencies. I think that's important. I want to bring up an earlier point, which is also fighting for our federal workers means keeping the federal government open. And too often, our federal government and keeping it open has been a game of political football, and Congress hasn't been doing its basic job. And this has real-world impacts, which I saw as a commander in the military. I witnessed how a government shutdown impacted sensitive military operations that civilians were supporting. So it's absolutely critical that we keep it open, and we need people who understand those impacts. It's one of the reasons that the last 2 deputy directors of the CIA, senior people at the Department of Defense, like Michelle Flournoy, most senior woman ever to serve there, retired generals and admirals and ambassadors have all endorsed our campaign, because I understand the real-world impact. I also have real-world solutions for that. I think we need a law to go through Congress that says that if you don't pass a budget and the appropriations bills that allow you to keep the government open, then there's no recess on October 1st. There's no going home. And most importantly, let's hit people in Congress where they care about it a month before their elections. There's no fundraising. You watch how quickly that transforms how Congress works and how we keep the government open. Thanks.
All right. Next important question, and I thought of this yesterday when I got the notice about, if any of you have Twitter accounts, and I know all the candidates here do, make sure you change your passwords because they were exposed, almost all the users. They haven't said how many, but just enough. And make sure you are not, they're not the same as other passwords that you have. So going into that, what do you think is the appropriate role of the federal government in regulating social media sites? Social media sites are also very important to businesses, especially in promoting their work and sharing what they're doing. So we'd love to hear what you guys think of that.
So I think we can all agree that in this day and age, the internet, social media, Facebook is not a novelty anymore. It is part of our everyday life. No longer do we look to phone books or things like that. We are using the internet every day in our life. And so that I think that because of that, the internet and social media sites need to be held accountable, similar to what we see in a on-the-street kind, brick and mortar kind of business. And we've seen firsthand what happens when it doesn't take place. And the perfect example of that is Facebook. A lot of our data was taken and used for ways that we didn't approve, we didn't know was happening. And so I think that the federal government has a role in oversight, although privacy, I will admit, is a slippery slope, and we need to also make sure we're maintaining privacy. But that, a company like Facebook or a company like Twitter or any internet company is being held accountable to a similar way that a on-the-street kind of business is. And I think if we don't do that, we're just only going to open ourselves up more to selling our data, to hacking from the Russians that we've already seen. And so I really think that we can play a role in tightening up those regulations.
Absolutely. We saw the Russians literally undermine our democracy. It's not enough to just notify people when their information has been compromised. I wasn't surprised, by the way, that I didn't get a notification on that, because it was very clear who was targeted in this last election. And we have to ensure that we have strong regulations and guidelines that we can protect our democracy and ensure that there is transparency and we're able to see where these ads are coming from. We're also able to see and track the bots and the trolls that are working to push out unwanted information, and I think that's incredibly impactful. I think we also need to invest in cybersecurity in this country. That is another way we could work to diversify the tech industry here locally, is to invest in cybersecurity training and ensure that we have a strong check on our social media sites and they aren't able, whether it's Russia or anyone else in the future, to undermine our democracy.
I absolutely believe that the federal government needs to intervene when there is foreign power meddling in our elections. I believe the foreign government has a role in protecting users' privacy. And I believe in the Constitution. And as much as I would say, I think the hardest question that I get asked on the campaign trail is what you would do in the government to combat the rise of fake news. And it's tough because I think about, and this is one of very few things I'm grateful to Donald Trump for, I wouldn't want to give him more power in regulating content. I wouldn't want to give this president more access to determining what is fact and what is fiction, because his facts are fiction. And so I think we have to be very careful as we move forward that in our effort to ensure the truth gets out there, that we don't give the federal government more autonomy in determining what the truth is that could then be abused by administrations like we have now.
I think that the federal government's role in regulating social media can be quantified in three things. TPS, transparency, privacy, and security. Transparency, the government has to guarantee and regulate to make sure that our social media is transparent. That we know, number one, where the information is coming from and what they're doing with our information. Those are the two areas in transparency. Privacy, we need to know, and it has to be regulated, that the information that we want to be private has to remain private. And that's what I believe the government has a regulatory interest in. And then finally, security. We need to know if our information is compromised the same way credit card companies have to notify us when our credit card has been compromised. We have to get immediate notification, and there must be some information as to how they're going to fix it. And then the second part of security is, where is this information coming from? Is it coming from Russia? Is it coming from some other place? As my co-panelists have said, Russian infiltration of our social media is a huge, huge problem. We have to know when bots are sending us information or providing advertising, and the government has to get involved and regulate that, because the Republicans in Congress don't seem to be interested in the fact that the Russians affected these elections, at least tried to affect these elections. And we have to be interested in that. And social media sites is one place where they attempted to do that, and we need to regulate that.
Thanks, Art. This is an incredibly important issue. It's about the future of our democracy, the future way in which we communicate. And so it's incredibly important that we get it right. And I think Allison points out it's complicated. We don't want to control content, but we want to want to know where content comes from. I think there's a few components that we need to address here. One, our intelligence community works hard every day to understand the cyber threats that confront us. And yet the mechanisms that exist for sharing that with our business community, including our social media and other community, are not that great. And so we need to improve that and make sure that as the intelligence community learns of threats, that they're sharing them widely, and we need to do a much better job of that. I think another piece that needs to happen is we do need to hold companies themselves accountable for taking basic measures to protect our data. And when they fail to do it, they should be liable for what happens next. And too often, not only aren't they liable, look at what happened with Experian, right? Experian leaked massive, they did not guard data that they should have known was targeted. And yet not only are they not really liable for what happened, but beyond that, they are able to profit on it on the future by offering protection services that expire and that you have to renew. So we need to pass laws in Congress that say, one, yes, the community needs to be shared. When we learn of threats, we need to figure out ways to get that out. And then two, that you are actually liable for your customers' data, protecting their privacy, protecting the data you gather, causing them to opt in, right? But beyond that, that if you fail in your basic duty to protect the people who use your services, then you can't make money off of them for that. I think that's where we need to start. Thank you.
This is an area where the federal government has not been nimble enough, has been really behind the curve, and has not provided adequate protections. I don't know if you guys saw, but yesterday the Attorney General's office announced that there were 7,000 people in Virginia who downloaded the app or whatever it was, and that turned into Cambridge Analytica got data for 1.7 million Virginians. Friends, and we're able to market to them. So that's I think it's 1 out of 5 Virginians. That's crazy. Platforms like Twitter and Facebook have already said that they'll comply with the Honest Ads Act. That's a start. So they'll have the same disclosures for political advertising on their platforms as we see on TV or in print media, and that's long overdue. But these platforms need to be more proactive about filtering out fake news and news that is coming and content that's coming from foreign governments or foreign actors trying to influence our elections. With regard to privacy, there are some things that I think we should do. Rather than rather than have the onus be on the consumer to opt out of things or to not even have that option through these contracts of adhesion, I think that the onus should be on the platforms to get people to opt into the sharing and to opt into these disclosures of your private data. Also, it's worth keeping in mind that this administration has been going backwards on these issues. One of the first things that the FCC did was to repeal net neutrality. That's going to allow, and Barbara Comstock went along with this, it's going to allow ISPs to sell all your data, all your browsing history, and everything you've done on the internet to the highest bidder. Things like that are dangerous, and we need to reverse them.
Thank you. So next, what is your approach to addressing gun violence in this country?
This is one of the top issues in the country and one of the top issues in our district and for our campaign. And I am proud to be a candidate of distinction for Moms Demand Action and endorsed by the Pride Fund to end gun violence. Because as I said earlier, the idea that this issue is too complicated for Congress to act upon is absolutely outrageous. I mean, we are seeing students all over the country, students in our district. Some are supported by their school board members and administrators, and some aren't. And they're walking out of their classrooms anyway. They're marching in the streets. They are serving as the conscience of our country right now, and thank God they are. I believe that if you're too dangerous to board an airplane, you should be too dangerous to walk into a gun store and buy a gun. As 97% of the country agrees, I also believe you should have a universal background check. I believe those with a record of domestic violence should never, ever get their hands on a firearm. I also believe the weapons our soldiers use on the streets of Baghdad should never be used in the streets of our community. We are 5% of the world's population, yet we own over 40% of the world's guns. We have a gun epidemic in our country, and we have to do something about it. And we have to ensure that not only at the bare minimum, our kids can go to school and feel safe, we also have to reduce the homicides and suicides in this country. We are asking our young people in particular to grow up far too early. We are stripping them of their innocence, and as a country we're failing them, and we have to do more.
Barbara Comstock sold our kids' safety to the NRA. I'm running fundamentally to take it back. I support universal background checks, banning assault weapons, which worked the first time we tried it, even with a more flawed bill than is getting, that has been introduced now. Closing the gun show loophole, I think there are obvious data-backed solutions, fully funding research on gun violence that any reasonable person would support, and that United States voters support. writ large. After the town hall for our lives, where we talked about gun violence, I had a student-led roundtable. And what the students told me, in addition to the broader policy pieces, was, first of all, in a roundtable that was probably, it was less than 20 people. 3 of them had lost a loved one to suicide as a teenager already. There were 5 high schools represented there, and one of the students, I'll never forget, said, look, the person we're supposed to go to for mental health and to get into college is the same high school counselor. You know, helping somebody analyze their SAT scores and chances to get into college and preserving and protecting and improving somebody's mental health are fundamentally different skill sets. And then one of the other students said, yeah, my high school counselor tells me that from October to April, we're only focusing on colleges. So the mental health issues need to happen in the other months. We need to do a better job about getting the resources to our schools to help protect student mental health, and we need to do a better job as Democrats and Gun Violence Prevention Act advocates to follow the lead of the Parkland students and acknowledge that this is not an issue that starts and stops at the school doors, and that there are disproportionate impacts on communities of color that have too often been left out of the narrative.
My outrage against gun violence is not newfound. It's been going on for about 30 years. I've been trying to take guns off the streets. But the day I couldn't talk publicly about my outrage beyond law enforcement, but literally within 2 months of leaving the federal government, I went public with the Washington Post saying that what the Republicans are doing to demagogue the ATF and gun laws is ridiculous and it's wrong. Our gun laws are not sufficient to protect people, and I took that public position. And then I wrote op-ed pieces saying 2 things we need to do. We need to, for sure, to save lives. We need to outlaw assault weapons, and we need to enact red flag statutes. In the states that have allowed red flag statutes, and the federal red flag statutes, in the states that have allowed red flag statutes, they have stymied domestic violence murders by close to 50%. So they're real and they need to be put in place, and there's almost common, universal majority opinions that would agree to that. There is common ground on all of that legislation that we can do if we just try and find common ground. The most important thing I would do, though, if I went to Congress, is I would hold oversight hearings immediately with the NRA. Why? Because they are a corrupt lobbying group. And I would want to expose why they are taking so much money from Russia. I have 30 seconds, but I'm going to tell you I would have a long, long hearing with respect to the NRA. Do you think Putin wants a Second Amendment over there? No. They're giving money to the NRA because they want to destabilize America. That's the only reason we're doing it. And we need to expose the NRA for who they are so we can put them in their place, because they are the problem with guns in America. I'm telling you that right now. Thank you.
We have a major problem with gun violence in this country. And the problem that underlies it isn't the culture, isn't mental illness, isn't anything else, other than the lack of courage in our politics to take on the NRA. Concealed carry bill, the top priority of the NRA. It was asked for a veto. 60 gun safety groups said they hadn't been consulted and asked for a veto. Every town for gun safety called it a gift to the gun lobby. And while it's resulted in a few dozen background checks and a few dozen arrests that are reported, it's resulted in 15,000 out-of-state concealed carry permits being issued. And more importantly, the homicide rate in Virginia by guns in 2016 went up. And we know by research that you expect 10 to 15% increases in homicides and gun violence anytime you liberalize concealed carry laws. So we really need to fight back. We need to have people in Congress who will make bold statements, fight back against the NRA, and do it always. And I'm ready to do that in Congress. Thank you.
The time has come for America as a nation to say not one more and actually follow through. Thoughts and prayers are not enough. We need policy and we need change. I am proud to be a Moms Demand candidate of distinction in this race, and I am proud to have been endorsed by the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence, a coalition that is made up of those very 60 groups that Mr. Helmer is referencing. In the state Senate, I have fought for legislation that would impose mandatory universal background checks, that would ban bump stocks in high-capacity magazines, and get guns out of the hands of domestic abusers, only to see all those bills die on a party line vote. Well, guys, if you can't change their minds, there comes a time you have to change their seats. And we have an opportunity to do that this year in Virginia 10. In Congress, I will fight to institute true universal background checks for gun purchases, to reimpose the assault weapons ban, fight for bans on high-capacity magazines, and for red flag laws that can get guns out of the hands of people who are dangerous and volatile.
So it's clear that the gun violence problem in this country is unique to this country. We try to blame it on mental health issues, video games, but when you look at other countries in this world that have tighter gun control issues, you are 6 times more likely here in the US than in Canada to be a victim of gun violence. You are 16 times more likely here than in Germany, and 29 times more likely to be a victim of gun violence here than in Australia. So obviously something is going on in this country. And as a scientist, I tend to look at this through a scientific lens. I agree with everything my fellow candidates have been talking about as ways to combat gun violence, but I think those are fixes and not solutions. And so I firmly believe, and I think we need to call on our current congresspeople to repeal the Dickey Amendment so that the CDC, who is perfectly designed to do this kind of research, they look at heart disease, they look at automobile accidents, but they're prevented right now by the Dickey Amendment from performing gun violence research and understanding what is the root cause of this so that we can truly find the correct solution and get on board with the rest of the countries in this world. And I also think that by repealing the Dickey Amendment and allowing us to find the root cause, this will be the way that we can fight back at the NRA. When we have that data in hand, we can show it to our legislators to say, these are the kind of laws that we need to enact and get the NRA out of our government. And compared to other countries, we do have the Second Amendment in our Constitution, so we need to work within those parameters. And even when I was talking with my 7th grader about the walkouts that were happening in March, telling him about the Second Amendment, the situation going on in this country, and he's like, but Mom, with a right comes a responsibility. So even at 12 and a half years old, he is understanding that we're not infringing on the Second Amendment, we're not taking away anybody's guns or anybody's rights, but we're just trying to maintain control and save lives of our children.
We have now reached the portion of our program where we go to Q&A. Same standards apply of answer of 2 minutes. So I will start by taking questions from the audience. And we have one in the corner there.
Hey, thank you. My name is Morgan Jameson, and I just had one question that I wrote down to myself, so let me pull it up. As probably one of the youngest people in the room, I just want to know, how are you engaging younger voters and bringing them into the field? Is it an issue such as student loan debt, or what are you doing to galvanize people who are now engaged and otherwise wanting to be a part of that process? And what have you done in the past to show your actions speak louder than words in that regard?
Can I talk loud and can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, great question. My first job was working as student coordinator on the board campaign when Young Democrats kept changing their age restriction to include the older and older leadership as they aged. And so in my time working with Young Democrats, it moved up to 40 and under, and needless to say, the continuum from high school students to 40-year-olds, depending on what your definition is of young people, there are different issues that matter to them more. I'm the only person, I believe, on this panel who's held student roundtables. I have a youth coordinator who has volunteered and is continuing to organize those. They primarily focus on gun violence, but there are a number of other issues that come up there too, that I look forward to being able to champion in Congress. You know, one of the things that one of the students raised with me was, look, we do a really good job federally of providing free and reduced lunch at our school to kids without any stigma being attached. And wouldn't it be great if you could extend that program to gun and hygiene products for women and girls in the school system? But to the broader issues about, you know, as you move into college affordability and then taxes and home ownership, I think our government has not done a good job of opening that opportunity. I think if you look at this tax bill, if we use the $650 to $670 billion that we spend annually, ostensibly to incentivize investment in economic growth, and instead use that money to invest in the things that we know spur it, starting your own business, going to college, buying your first home. There are a number of things that not only would help young people access opportunity, but help our government and communities as well.
Fatima, may I make a parliamentary inquiry?
Yes.
Can we limit the answers to 1 minute so we have an opportunity for more questions?
Yeah, totally fine. Candace, you?
I'm good with that.
Okay.
Oh, change the rules in the middle of the game.
I don't know, do we as candidates?
It's fine. So I'll focus. Oh. So I'll focus on what I think is the singular issue that is galvanizing our youth today. Now I've been to Democratic groups at our colleges, and they are concerned about their education costs. They are concerned about where their jobs are going to be when they get out of school. But that doesn't seem to be what's motivating kids to vote. What seems to be today that's motivating kids to vote is gun safety and gun laws. And I have never been more proud of my children, 16 and 18, who have marched with the kids, March for Your Lives, and actually listening to those kids in Washington, D.C. when they spoke for the kids from Parkland, it is absolutely amazing. And it's sad that our congressmen and women are the children in the room, and the children are the adults in the room. And I will tell you this is galvanizing them, and they are going to change the world, and they're going to change America, and I keep encouraging them to do so.
I think I have an unfair advantage on this one, Morgan, since I'm the only candidate sitting on the stage who started this race as a young Democrat. And as my wife reminds me, she's still a young Democrat. Look, I think there's a few things we need to do. One is we need to meet young people where they are. That means we need to be exciting stuff on social media. We just put out a video on gun safety that has over 3 million, that now has 3 million views between social media platforms, because we're doing things in different, bold, and interesting ways that appeal to young people. That's why if you walk into my office on any given day of the week, you will see so many kids from high school and colleges who are out there and who are out there working for it. And I think what inspires them, what motivates them, is candidates who are going to take bold positions on policies. I support a Medicare for all option. I support the impeachment of Donald Trump. I refuse to take corporate PAC money. And I'm proposing ways in which we can make sure that education is paid for in return for some form of national service. Those are the sorts of bold, progressive policies that young people are looking for, and that's why they're flocking for us, and they're ready to see new faces, new leadership, and a different approach in Congress. Thanks.
So I have been working with local high school and young Democrats for years, and it's amazing to see how many interns we have in high school and in college who want to come in and work with our campaign. And some of the groups I've been working with include groups like Rise to Run, which is a group that trains high school age girls to progressive girls to run for office someday, and I've been working with them both in Richmond and here. I've also patroned legislation about the issues that they care about, worked hard to fight for those issues. Gun violence prevention, we've already talked about, but I also patroned legislation which passed this session in Richmond to help deal with student loan debt, to create an Office of Student Loan Ombudsman to kind of act as a go-between for kids with their student loan lenders and things like that. So these are the issues that we've been working on. And I also, you know, I don't walk the, I walk the talk. I don't just talk the talk.
So I agree. The younger vote is where it's at. It's the largest population, and we need to make sure we're addressing the issues that are important to them. And the very premise of my campaign is looking towards the future. The three policies that are most important to us and working on in Congress is education, healthcare, and the environment. I went to a state school in Illinois because that's all my parents could afford, and I've just finished paying off the loans. So clearly we need to work on college tuition. And community colleges, I am open to free tuition with a civil service requirement and making sure that our public education, well, that's quick, it's fully funded. The environment, you know, not only are we saving our planets, but that's where the jobs are, I think, and that's where we need to train our young people. And healthcare, I'm the only candidate up here talking about a single payer healthcare program for all. We've been talking about it for decades. It's the only way to cover the entire country, regardless of pre-existing condition, employment status. That's where we need to go for the future of our country.
Yesterday, I was thrilled to talk to students at Langley High School. And I was invited to speak to these students along with Barbara Comstock. And it won't surprise you that I was the only one that showed up, right? It is important that we connect with students that are concerned right now. And yes, they're concerned about reducing gun violence because it's critically important. And I am meeting with students from kindergarten to seniors in high school that are concerned with this issue. But college affordability is #1 issue among students right now. And working to find ways in which we can make college more affordable so that students don't have to make the tough decision of whether or not they can go. And I also believe in supporting a strong national service program. I had the opportunity to serve in AmeriCorps Vista. And I think there's many ways to serve your country. But providing an opportunity for national service, whether it be Teach for America, Service Corps, AmeriCorps, as a way to help reduce college loans, I think would be incredibly effective.
Right. Wow. All right, so rapid fire here. Dude in the back there.
Okay. I'm a member of the 10th district because Frank Wolf won my precinct and Jerry Connolly did not. I live with a lot of conservative folks. But I know that the eastern side of the district is more liberal than the western side, but very far west. So I'm wondering, I'm curious about your strategy. I'd be happy with any of the 6 of you, better than what we have, certainly. But are you trying? Is your strategy going to be to drive out the base and get them out, or are you going to also try to appeal to those folks out west and who might be more conservative but still independent? So the strategy question.
I'm not going to reveal my strategy. No. The reality is, Barbara Comstock is a tough cookie when she's out there in the election. We need to do what Pennsylvania did and what Alabama did. And we need to elect someone who reflects the district best and can get not just the Democratic voters, but the independent and moderate voters. Doug Jones and Connor Lamb were both moderates who had a career as assistant United States attorneys, solving problems pragmatically and in a nonpartisan way. I believe I offer that. Thank you.
The key to winning this district is doing well in the East and the West. I mean, we lost so badly in the West that it basically overcame how well we did in the East of the district. And so to win out there, you need a candidate who can run differently, who can say, look, I understand your frustrations. I understand that you think that Washington isn't working. Who feels just as comfortable at a tractor pull in Frederick, which I've been to, as he does at a cocktail party in McLean. That's the kind of experience I have. That's the kind of record of service I'm running on. When you stand out there and say, yes, I agree with you, I'm for the flag and American pie, and I love my mom. And I mean that genuinely and sincerely. And I understand, even though I think we need responsible gun safety laws, I know very well how to use one of these. I've been trained on everything from a 9mm pistol to an automatic grenade launcher to a tank, right? So you need to have someone who can go out there, who can meet people where they are. In this campaign, our campaign has been doing it from the beginning. We've been doing it for the last year. We've met folks all over the district. We met many people who said, I haven't had a Democrat come and talk to me in years. And as you talk to me, I realized that maybe I am a Democrat. And I think that's how we win. Thanks.
We can't leave any votes on the table. In order to win Virginia 10, we need to get Republicans and moderates to vote for Democrats. And so we can't leave the western half of the district behind. But we win it by going out and talking to them about their issues. You know, they need rural broadband. Their access to employment, their access to education is severely curtailed when they don't have access to rural broadband. And so making sure that we talk to them about those issues, about things like bringing jobs to that part of the district, things that are going to help, because they often feel like they've been left behind. So we can't just look at one half of the district and ignore the rest of it.
So I'm running for Congress because I want to be a representative in the true sense of the word. I think Barbara Comstock is a congresswoman. I don't think she represents all of the interests of this district. And I've spent my time since the campaign started to hitting every single corner as often as I can. I was out in Leesburg last night, Berryville earlier this week, you know, because as we've been saying, what's important in McLean is very different from what's important out in Winchester and Frederick and Clark County. And so I'm running to be that representative, to listen to the people, to come and talk to them, and to break down those big issues. You know, I know climate change can be a big, liberal, scary idea, but when you break it down to people at their kitchen table, climate change affects them in their jobs, in their healthcare, and things like that. And I think that's how we can get our message across to all of the district.
I think if Donald Trump has given us one thing, he's given us the opportunity to connect with every single voter in every single community. Routinely, Barbara Comstock has run up the scoreboard in the western part of this district. And it's important, as Democrats, we are in every single corner of this district. I am proud that we are the first Democrat to open an office out in Winchester. I've been endorsed by the mayor of Winchester, in fact, because it's important that we're able to connect with communities where they are. It's important as a Democrat, we're out west talking about the benefits of the ag bill. It's important that we're working already, as our campaign is, connecting veterans to care closer to home. It's important that we do the work that unfortunately Barbara Comstock isn't doing. So I am proud to be in every single inch of this district, working to build coalitions of Democrats, independents, and frustrated Republicans.
First, I think you have to, when it comes to strategy, look at how Barbara Comstock has won. And
it is me. I had the same problem the last day. So Barbara Comstock has won by using the expense to communicate in this district and people's fear to run away from the record and capitalize on people not actually knowing where she stands. I believe, and her experience in the federal government. So I think my profile as somebody who is a progressive champion to galvanize the base, but also has 10 years of national security experience and an MBA that can go toe-to-toe with the business community matters. And I have seen that talking to winery, businesses in Clark County, and then talking to small business owners in Leesburg, and then talking to VC people here. They want somebody that can go toe-to-toe with Barbara Comstock on the economic issues and stand up on federal government record.
All right, so we have time for 2 more questions. Delegate Kathleen Murphy, because I don't want to get in trouble. And I kind of get your hand up for a while. So, yes, you in the back with double checking.
Good morning. My name is Buda Goodride. I come from a criminal justice perspective. So my question to the panel is as follows. What is your plan as far as making sure that we're changing this from the school to the prison pipeline, as well as re-engaging those individuals who've been part of the criminal justice system from a prosecutor perspective as to re-engaging them within the community and reinvesting in them?
That's a great, wait a minute. That's a great question that merits more than a 1-minute answer. I think a couple of things stay in mind. One, the second part of your question is almost as important as the first part of your question, so let's address that. Once we put people in prison, we have a terrible record of reintegrating them back into society. And once you pay your debt, you should have an opportunity to have all of your civil rights restored. You should be able to vote. In fact, the history of both mass incarceration and preventing people who've been incarcerated from voting dates directly to Jim Crow. We should recognize why that's there. We should fight back again, and it's meant to promote racial inequities. As far as more broadly, we need to find places in our federal law